There is a specific kind of silence that exists only at 2:30 in the morning in a city that never fully sleeps. It isn't quiet. It's the absence of the right sounds, replaced by the wrong ones. The hiss of a radiator that hasn't worked in 3 winters. The settling of a building that was old before you were born. The particular creak of a floorboard that only speaks when no one is walking on it. Tanha knew all of these sounds. She had cataloged them the way you catalog the sounds of a place you never intended to stay in long. That was 8 months ago. She was still here. Apartment Quattro. F.A. the Callaway Building, somewhere in the older part of the city, where the streets were narrow and the streetlights had a yellowish quality, like old photographs of places no one visits anymore. Tana had moved in on a Tuesday in April with 2 suitcases and a box of books, and the particular determination of someone who has decided, quietly and without ceremony, to start over. Start over from what? She didn't say. Not to her landlord, Mr. Petrov, who smelled of cigarettes and asked no questions. Not to her co-workers at the data firm 12 floors above street level downtown. Not to her mother, who called every Sunday and received the same answer every time.
I'm fine, Mom. The apartment is fine. The city is fine. Everything is fine.
She had learned that fine was a door. You said it, and people stopped knocking. The apartment itself was what real estate listings called character-rich, which meant the walls were thin, the windows rattled in wind, and the bathroom tiles had grout the color of old secrets. The radiator in the bedroom clicked and hissed on a schedule that bore no relationship to temperature. The hallway outside her door smelled of other people's cooking in a faint, chemical undertone she had never identified and had stopped trying to. But it was hers. The lock worked. The chain worked. She had checked both the night she moved in, and she checked him still. Every night, before she slept, some habits were harder to explain than others. She woke at 2:17, hummed to nothing. That was the thing, not a sound that woke her. The absence of one. The radiator had stopped its clicking, which it never did. The city outside had pulled back into itself. Even the wind had paused.
Why is it so quiet?
She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and counted the shadows. This was something she had always done, in the dark, in new places, in moments when the architecture of her own thoughts became unreliable. Count the shadows, name the shapes, anchor yourself to the physical world. Shadow 1. The window frame. Shadow 2. The closet door, slightly open, because the latch had never worked properly. Shadow 3. The chair where she draped tomorrow's clothes. Shadow 4 was new.
It's the curtain. Wind moved the curtain, except there's no wind. There hasn't been wind for the past... Stop. It's the curtain.
She reached for her phone to 19 a.m. The screen's light pushed the shadows back into their corners and she could see clearly the curtain. Still. The chair, her clothes folded over it, the closet door, open its usual 2 inches. Nothing. No.
See? Nothing.
She set the phone face down and closed her eyes. That was when she heard it. It came from the bathroom. A groan. Low, long, structural. The kind of sound old pipes make when pressure builds somewhere deep in the building's system. She had heard it before. She told herself she had heard it before, but this was different in a way she couldn't immediately name.
Pipes. Old building. Happens all the time.
Except pipes didn't pause. Pipes didn't modulate. Pipes didn't produce a sound that rose slightly at the end, the way a voice rises at the end of a question. Say sat up. The apartment sat with her. The walls close and attentive. The ceiling low in the way ceilings in old buildings are low, not architecturally, but atmospherically, as though the building had been slowly exhaling for decades and had forgotten how to inhale.
It's 2 a.m. and you're alone and you're tired and old buildings make sounds. That is a fact. That is an empirical, documented, unambiguous fact.
She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold through her socks. The kind of cold that feels deliberate. She sat there for a moment, just listening. The sound came again. Lower this time, and closer to the wall than the pipes, as if whatever was producing it had moved.
Don't.
She stood up anyway. The hallway between her bedroom and the bathroom was 11 feet long. She knew this because she had measured it once, in the first week, in the middle of the night. For reasons she had not examined closely, she stood at one end of it now. The bathroom door was open. She always left it open. Another habit, another thing she didn't examine. The dark inside the bathroom was a different quality of dark than the rest of the apartment. Thicker, more considered.
You're going to walk down there. You're going to turn on the light. You're going to see old pipes and old tile and your own face in the mirror, and you're going to feel very stupid and go back to bed.
See, walk. The floorboard outside the bathroom door, the one that only spoke when no one was walking on it, was silent under her weight. She reached the door frame, reached inside, found the light switch. The light came on. Old tile, white fixtures, the mirror above the sink, slightly fogged at the edges the way mirrors in old buildings fog, perpetually, even in dry weather. The shower curtain, plain white, slightly translucent, closed, the way she always left it. She stood in the doorway and looked at each thing in turn and named it, and it was all exactly what it was supposed to be. And then she looked at the mirror. The fog on the mirror's edges was normal. The shape in the center of the fog was not letters, not written, cleared, as if a finger had moved through the condensation and removed it in deliberate strokes, leaving the reflective surface clean in the shape of words.
2 words. You stayed.
No. That's condensation does that. Patterns form in condensation. Your brain finds patterns in random shapes. That is a documented psychological phenomenon. That is not words. That is not default text.
But her brain was very good at patterns. She had always been told this. It was why she was good at her job. Why she noticed things other people missed. Why she had driven 800 miles to a city where she knew no one and rented an apartment she never intended to stay in long. She was very good at patterns. And this pattern said you stayed.
Who wrote that?
Not a question. The inflection was wrong for a question. It was the tone of someone who, somewhere below the surface of conscious thought, already knew the answer and was not ready to say it out loud. She reached out and wiped the mirror with her palm. The word smeared, disappeared into general fog. She stood very still and watched the mirror and waited to see if anything would write itself back. Nothing did. She became aware, slowly, of the shower curtain behind her, reflected in the glass. White, slightly translucent. She had always left it closed. She could not remember closing it tonight.
Did I close that?
She turned around. Nothing was behind the curtain. She pulled it back with one sharp motion, and there was only the tub white porcelain, slightly stained at the drain, and the cold metal of the faucet, and nothing else.
Nothing. See?
She let the curtain fall back. She turned off the bathroom light. She walked back down the 11-foot hallway. She got into bed. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling, and she thought, with the particular clarity that arrives at 2:30 in the morning when your body is exhausted and your mind refuses to follow, about a name. A name she had not said out loud in 8 months.
Mara.
She didn't say why. She didn't think the full thought. She pulled it back. The way you pull your hand back from a stove, reflexive. Practiced the motion of someone who has burned themselves before and learned the distance to keep. But the name sat in the room with her now. And the room, old walls, thin ceiling, radiator for the first time in months, seemed to receive it. At 3:04 a.m., the groaning came back, not from the bathroom this time. The shared wall, the one that on the other side was, according to Mr. Petrov, an identical apartment. Apartment 4E. Currently unoccupied. Had been unoccupied since she moved in.
Someone moved in and I didn't hear about it, and the walls are thin and they're moving furniture at 3 a.m., which is insane, but that is the explanation. That is the only explanation that makes sense.
She pressed her palm flat against the wall. It was cold. Colder than the air in the room. Colder than the floor had been, and beneath her palm, faint, rhythmic, unmistakable.
A pulse.
That's the pipes. In the wall, hot water pipes pulse. She'd read that somewhere. Old buildings, pressure systems. That is what that is. That is pipes. That is...
The pulse stopped, precisely when she named it, as if it had hurt her. She pulled her hand back from the wall, and in the silence that followed, the very precise, very deliberate silence, she heard something that her mind spent the next several seconds trying to reclassify as anything other than what it was. A voice from the other side of the wall. Low, almost inaudible. The way a voice sounds when it's being careful to stay beneath the threshold of clarity. Present enough to register, quiet enough to deny.
You didn't tell them.
Tanha did not move.
That was the television. Neighbor's television. Someone in another unit has a television on, and the sound travels through the building. And that is a sentence someone said on a television program at 3 a.m. That is all that was. That is... You didn't tell them what you did. Stop.
The word surfaced in her mind the way things surface from deep water. Not arriving from outside, but rising from inside. What you did. A phrase that landed with the specific weight of something that had been waiting for a surface to land on. She sat on the edge of her bed with her hand still raised from where she pulled it from the wall, and she breathed, and she tried to think clearly, and the only thing that came clearly was Mana. The name again. Uninvited. The way guilt is uninvited. The way guilt arrives at 3 a.m. in a cold apartment in a city far from everywhere you used to be. Arriving not because you forgot, but precisely because you never did. She had not always lived alone. This was the fact she didn't discuss. Not with co-workers. Not with her mother on Sunday calls. Not with the version of herself she had assembled in this city, in this apartment, in these 8 months. She had lived, before this, with someone who had trusted her with the specific trust of a person who had no one else.
She used to call me at 2 a.m. When it got bad, I told her I needed sleep. I had an early morning. I couldn't keep doing this. She needed to find someone professional too. I turned my phone off.
She had turned her phone off on a Tuesday night in October, 8 months ago, because she was exhausted and her own life was falling apart in its own quiet ways, and she had told herself, had genuinely, with full sincerity, told herself that Mara would be fine, that she always called, and then she was fine, that this time was like all the other times. It was not like all the other times.
I left her behind. I moved. I changed my number. I told myself I had to save myself first. I told myself she wouldn't. I told myself.
She had told herself many things. In 8 months, she had told herself enough things to build a whole new life from them. A new city. A new apartment. A new version of Tanha, who was fine, and whose apartment was fine, and for whom everything was fine. The wall beside her bed was silent. The apartment was silent. And in that silence she became aware, with the slow, nauseating certainty of someone who has been avoiding a thought for so long that avoiding it has become the central architecture of their existence, that the sound behind the wall had never been trying to get in. It had been in here the whole time. At 3:31 a.m., Tana stood up. She walked to the bathroom. She turned on the light. The mirror was clear. No fog. No words. She stood and looked at her own face, and her own face looked back, and there was nothing wrong with what she saw. Except she was standing at the sink and had no memory of walking there. Her hand was on the faucet. The faucet was running. The water was cold. And on the mirror's surface, perfectly clear now, no fog, no ambiguity, written not in condensation but in something that had dried and been there long enough to leave a residue.
You stayed.
Not written tonight, written a long time ago.
How long has that been there? How many times have I stood here? How many nights have I?
She looked at her hand on the faucet. Her finger, the tip of her index finger, old condensation. Dried, the kind of residue left by someone who writes on a mirror and then stands back and reads what they've written. Her own fingerprint, in the loop of the Y. The groaning sound came from the wall one final time. Not a question this time. Not a voice. Simply the sound a building makes when it has been holding something for a very long time and has finally, quietly, decided to let it go.
I wrote that. When? How many times have I written that?
At 3:47 a.m., Tenha sat on the bathroom floor, with her back against the cold tub and her phone in her hands. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a name she had not deleted because deleting it had felt like the kind of finality she wasn't ready for. Mara, the number was disconnected. Had been for 8 months. Say, knew these. She called it sometimes anyway. Another thing she didn't examine. She held the phone to her ear and listened to the automated message and then the silence after it. The apartment around her was still. The radiator clicked once, just once, and was silent again. The hallway outside her door was empty. The wall of apartment 3 was cold and still and had nothing left to say.
I'm still here.
She lowered the phone. On the screen below Mara's disconnected number, a notification she had not seen before. A voicemail. Received 8 months ago on a Tuesday night in October. Unplayed. She stared at it. The building settled around her. Old walls. Old silent. The particular cold of a place that has absorbed more than it was designed to hold. She pressed play. In the morning, the neighbors would say they heard something at 3:47 a.m. from apartment 4F. A sound they couldn't describe exactly. Not a scream. Not crying. Something between those two things. Something that knew its own name. They said it sounded like it had been waiting a long time to be heard.